We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and this is a new low point in American culture. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Pepsi month, and this week we are talking the 1999 film EdTV. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, who's just a regular, everyday, normal dude from Texas, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do it. What is your history with this movie? Let's start there. Have you seen it before? What do you kind of know about its legacy?
Nothing. But no, not something I watched a lot as a kid, obviously. I mean, it came out when I was March 99, so I was about to be 12 4 months later, so it wasn't really something that was really on my radar. Obviously something like Truman Show, which came out, the whole joke this month is a Pepsi of something. And even then, like when I was a kid, Jim Carrey really wasn't on my radar either a lot, which is kind of odd.
Jim Carrey wasn't on your radar?
Like I knew who he was, but like his movie, like my parents didn't really like his movies, so we didn't really watch him a lot. So like I like remember
the Mask,
Batman Forever,
Ace Ventura. You weren't watching these?
Batman Forever and The Mask were the two that were there, but like Dumb and Dumber, Ace Ventura. I know I like saw Ace Ventura, but like my parents thought it was kind of dumb, so we didn't really like rent it or get it very often. Truman Show, obviously, which is a very different thing, but never really saw that. But this wasn't. It wasn't like I saw this instead. Like it wasn't. My parents were like, "Oh, we can't watch Truman Show," but here's EdTV. So it just blew right by me as a kid. Never went back and rewatched it. Never really saw it as something that I needed to like go back. I've never had a moment as an adult where I've gone back and been like, you know what I should do? Rewatch all the films of Ron Howard's filmography. So I've really, as I get older, even then, the only thing I really knew about this movie is like the theme of our month is that it was that movie kind of like Truman Show that came out less than a year after Truman Show did. And so going in, I was kind of and I guess I'd seen scenes, like maybe it was on TV and I caught like a clip of it or something. So I was interested in going back to watch it and see just how similar to Truman Show it is, which the answer is somewhat, but I was really kind of a blank slate going into this, really, as far as that goes. My only real knowledge is that it was that thing kind of like Truman Show.
Yeah, it's definitely the same broad concept. I mean, it's one man's life broadcast on TV 24/7, but turns out there's a lot of wiggle room in there for things you can make different. I mean, I certainly, no one's going to be suing this movie for, what's it called when you rip off something?
Plagiarism.
Not slander. Plagiarism, that's what it is. No one's suing this for plagiarism. Yeah. I thought I had seen it before. I was certain, like, I didn't see it in theaters. I thought I had rented it or saw it at home or on cable at least once. And maybe I did, but if so, I remembered very little. I knew the base concept of this movie and how it was different from Truman Show, but wholeheartedly, like, I did not remember entire scenes or like the final act of this movie. So maybe I didn't finish it. I don't know. I remember thinking it was fine. And, you know, if you asked me which the quote unquote good one was, I would have said, yeah, Truman Show. I don't know how you feel. I really like Truman Show. I enjoy it quite a bit, but a little early hot take here, maybe. I think this is also very good. I enjoy both of these movies now for very different reasons.
Well, we were talking about that a little bit before we started recording, but just that, you know, like you said, there's a lot of room in just simply the base concept of broadcasting someone's life. Like there's a whole lot of places to go with that, and you kind of liken Truman Show to being science fiction, which I actually think is a really great way to look at that, because I even said that, like, the base concept of Truman Show, that base story, is easily something that, Harlan Ellison could have written. The idea of a person who's plucked from literally their birth to being dropped into a dome and then being entertainment for the masses with a weird, lead producer who's got this insane God complex and things like that. Like, there's a whole big dystopic angle to that, really, even though it's kind of taking place in the quote unquote real world. The idea of what we're doing is very dystopic. Whereas with something like EdTV, as we'll talk about more throughout the episode, really presenting it in the more, I guess, like a guerrilla style, like a very gritty, we're just following this dude around. There's no secret. There's no mystery. There's nothing for the character to unpack. He just thinks this will be a cool thing to make some money until it's not. So there's a lot of difference in these concepts. There's a lot of difference in the execution, rather. So not so much the concept, but even just that base idea of, in Truman Show, he's not in on it. In EdTV, he is in on it. Like, that alone completely changes the experience of the films. And so it may be, like you said, a hot take to say it's pretty good, but I think at bare minimum, it is something that definitely exceeds that legacy of simply being that movie that's kind of like Truman Show.
Let's set the stage a little bit here. The movie is released March 26th of 1999, made on a budget of $80 million, higher than I would have expected. But as we'll get into it, it's kind of an all-star cast. At the box office, only brings in $35.2 million. This is a certified flop in theaters. Critically, 63% critic score, really not too bad. That is certified fresh, but interestingly, the audience score is 30%. I mean, people are taking to Rotten Tomatoes to take this movie down, no doubt. I mean, legitimately, the biggest criticism is, like, always in comparison to the Truman Show. Truman Show did it better is like the one-line takedown that so many people have of this movie. And you know what? I don't think that's fair, Andrew.
I agree. It seems, I would not have banked that I guess the audience really doesn't like Sherry. They just vote.
Dude, that aspect of this movie,
so nuts.
We'll get to it, but like, this movie is, even though like the internet isn't really involved in the concept of this movie, it's all about cable television. A person's life being broadcast to the nation feels more internet, akin to like a modern internet social media thing. But this is 1999. This is like AOL, Yahoo
dial
days.
up. Like, we're still
so far from like even streaming video being a common thing. But I feel like intentionally not, they kind of predicted the way like we're heading with like court of public opinion on a national scale. You know what I mean? There's
some very almost unsettling observations like that, or just like even getting into the idea that, sacrificing empathy or humanity for the sake of profits, because, you've got this idea that EdTV is so successful. Who cares if it's ruining the guy's life? That's just going to make us more money. Like, and that's something that obviously we've explored before that. And as time has gone on, has only become the subject of more and more things. And I guess does give EdTV a slight dystopic aspect. It's interesting you point out that this movie cost $80 million, because Truman Show only cost $60 million.
That's so bizarre.
It's kind of nuts to me that the movies that you would feel like Truman Show would be the more expensive one.
If you told me these are the two budgets, which one goes to which, I absolutely would have thought Truman Show was more expensive.
Exactly. Like, and maybe it's because it's Jim Carrey's the star of Truman Show, and like he's really the star of that movie. There's other, very, known actors and actresses in it, but Jim Carrey is clearly the vessel there.
It has like action set pieces. It has special effects. Like, it has stuff that this movie doesn't. It's crazy.
It's pretty wild. All that money in EdTV must have gone to Jay Leno. That's who it must have all been for. But you seen this? You heard about this? You heard about this EdTV? Ton of money for me, folks. Fantastic stuff. But wow, what a terrific audience. But then of course Truman Show makes $264 million off that $60 million budget, whereas EdTV doesn't even make half of that $80 million budget. So Yeah,
Andrew, I
it's
think
crazy
the
to think
real
about.
problem that happened with this movie at the box office is it released in 1999. It released in the greatest year ever for movies. I mean, you look at the murderer's row of movies that released in 1999. It's unlike
I don't know, Chris. I
any
feel like
other
if you were
year
gonna,
in
I feel like
history.
I feel like if you were gonna list off movies that came out in 1999 and reminded people of all the movies that came out, EdTV wouldn't even be on that list. I feel like you would completely skip over it, which I guess
That's
is
how good of
but,
a year it is. Thank you for backing me up. This is a pretty good movie and probably isn't even a top 20 of that year because it's so.
Did Ron
stacked.
Howard release any other movies this year, though? That's a great question. Because if he didn't, then I would say it's probably not on par with, say, 1957, where one of the greatest directors of all time did release 2 movies in a single calendar year. So,
I mean, if
gotta
that's
wonder.
your criteria for elevating an entire year, look, we don't need to rehash this, Andrew. We already had this exact debate on another podcast. The Great Game Debate podcast was nice enough to bring Andrew and myself on board. They actually changed it to the Great Movie Debate podcast just for us.
I had
And,
no idea he was going to do this, folks. So I want to make that very, very clear. Chris found a perfect way to segue into that.
Just want to make your blood boil a little bit before. I got to spring it on you. But that episode, if you're listening to us now, I think that episode just dropped of their podcast. So go and check it out. It's a great podcast in its own right, but that episode, I mean, Andrew, it's kind of a bonus episode of Best of the Rest. Really, it's me and you talking movies. And I think 1999 is the best year ever in film. Andrew disagreed. Your year, once again, was?
1957.
Yeah. So, if you want to hear our debate, it is a classic debate. We get 2 minutes each, go back and forth, 3 segments. The other hosts on that podcast kind of weigh in as a panel, cast their votes, and you can cast your vote. I'll put a link to that podcast in our show description. Check it out, give those guys a click, and join in on the vote. Who you think wins that one for greatest year in film? I think it's bizarre that the audience score is so much lower than critic score.
That is genuinely crazy to me. Like I would have thought that like at least this cast was likable enough that it'd be at least down the middle, like 50-50 or something. Like I don't know. That's nuts that it's so much lower.
Taking a look at the creative team, it's written by the writing duo of Lowell Gans and Babaloo Mandel.
That is wild.
I love these names.
I can't believe that.
Very successful writing duo. They wrote one of the greatest comedies of the 90s, Multiplicity. You know what? Hang on. I love Multiplicity. I do.
Yes.
Michael Keaton's one of the greatest performances in a comedy. I'll say that. The movie itself, it does have some problems being a comedy from the 90s, so I want to backtrack a little bit, but I genuinely love that movie, but it's all about the Keaton.
I think I mentioned to you that Michael Keaton, I think I sent it to you. He just did a video where he sat down with GQ and they did like a.
I haven't watched it because he said it was like 40 minutes and I get it.
It's like, it's genuinely like 36 minutes, but he has a whole chunk where he talks about Multiplicity where like he just talks about the insanity of like the schedule of like, well, on this day you're going to be 2 and 4. This day you're going to be just 1. On this day you're going to be like, this day you're going to be 4. This day you're going to be 3 specifically. And like, he actually has a conversation about 3 that I think is very interesting where like, they're talking about 3 and obviously the fact that he's kind of effeminate, and they bring up and Michael Keaton and Harold Ramis, who directs Multiplicity, the great Harold Ramis, they bring up the possibility of like the sexuality, and Harold Ramis went, well, it doesn't matter, does it? And Michael Keaton was like, no, it doesn't. And so it's actually kind of like an interesting conversation where like they just completely avoided it because weighing in on it served no purpose for the story. So they're like, yeah, he's just super sensitive. That's what he is. That's all the character is. It doesn't need to be anything, or rather, if there's any read beyond that, that can be on the audience to do. It's not on us to establish it. So, and then obviously 4 is a whole. There's a whole probably bigger conversation about 4, but
it's not a question of who the Mark Strong Award would go to in that movie.
It's which performance.
Honestly, how many awards? How many Mark Strong Awards does he get?
It's like which version of Michael Keaton gets the Mark Strong Award for that one? Because he's Oh, maybe one day, folks. I think that one sits right on the edge. Maybe we could do the Michael Keaton month where we go through all of his movies that are right on the edge. Because I will point out They are also responsible for another absolutely amazing comedy that Michael Keaton is in. They're responsible for Night Shift, which is one of the
I
first
haven't
movies
seen that.
Michael Keaton ever did. It's 1982, but it's Henry Winkler and Michael Keaton as Night Shift morgue employees, and Michael
Okay.
Keaton is the like weird free-spirited new employee who's driving Henry Winkler insane. So it's also directed by Ron Howard, and it is absolutely hilarious. It is just fantastic, and that
Gotta
one's
add
got,
it.
I think
Gotta add it to my list now.
I think Shelley Long's in that one too, and I think even Kevin Costner has like a brief. It's one of those like God, my boyfriend's back type things for. Is that Matthew McConaughey in My Boyfriend's Back? Just
Yeah, he
randomly
is,
in like one scene. Yeah, there's a scene like that for Kevin Costner in Night Shift where he's just like this random like frat boy or something, and you're just like, whoa, wait, go. Yep, that was him.
Jeff
but,
Goldblum is in the background of Annie Hall hanging up a phone for like 2 seconds. It's so weird.
It's always amazing to see that. But anyway, you can these guys' filmography speaks for itself.
Yeah,
I mean, they've
probably City Slickers and A League of Their Own at the top of the mountain as far as things that people are going to recognize.
Yep.
But also Splash, which Andrew, I didn't see Splash growing up. In fact, I was an adult. I mean, I obviously knew who Tom Hanks was, had his whole career. Go back and watch one of those early comedies, and I was like, okay, that was fun. Andrew, that was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the Academy Awards.
It was.
I'm not even saying it's bad, but I did not think
That's wild.
this is like an Academy Award caliber script. That was very wild.
It is, and you can obviously see that just looking at their filmography, they did have several collaborations with Ron Howard, Night Shift, Splash, EdTV. Just a lot. I mean, really, just a who's who. I mean, Spies Like Us was a John Landis movie with Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd. I mean, you've got stuff like Parenthood, which is a Steve Martin, Rick Moranis. I think even Keanu Reeves is in that one. Obviously, City Slickers 2, A League of Their Own. Like, these guys really, it's kind of a who's who of like the 80s and 90s with like big name comedy people. So, it's quite impressive. I was, and then these guys were the creators on like Joni Loves Chachi, which was a spinoff of Happy Days. Laverne and Shirley, which was another spinoff of Happy Days, and they were both writers, obviously, on Happy Days. So their relationship with Ron Howard goes back a very long time. So I'm not shocked at all that they were all coming together here.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said already numerous times, this movie is directed by Ron Howard. Andrew, just like we were saying about the budget earlier, if you told me that Ron Howard directed one of these movies, Truman Show or EdTV, I would have guessed Truman Show. That feels so much more Ron Howard.
Like a prestige thing, yeah.
High concept thing, yeah. Although I will say Ron Howard is a little bit like Steven Spielberg in the sense that he's not really locked into one genre, which I definitely respect. He directed the aforementioned Splash, Backdraft, Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind. So like prestige dramas, prestige. I mean, like Apollo 13 could have been a Steven Spielberg movie, right? Like this prestige space drama. I don't know. We call it a borderline action because it's that piece's high tension movie. Ron Howard's interesting. Like I really like a lot of his movies. But I feel like, I don't know. He's not, I don't consider him an auteur, but I also don't consider him like a journeyman director. He's certainly above that. He's just an extremely skilled filmmaker. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it's interesting watching, because like I won't say everything that he does is a hit. Obviously they're not. That's why we're here today. But like, I guess I credit him because he does take weird turns sometimes in a way that I don't know that Spielberg would at this point in his career. Like Spielberg kind of is going to do Spielberg things. Although he did do Ready Player One, which I thought was really strange for Spielberg to make a movie of a book that largely spends most of its pages just idolizing stuff Spielberg has done. Felt a little meta for my tastes. I have a whole conversation about Ready Player One in my brain somewhere that we won't do here. But yeah, and just like you look at his filmography, like he starts off with like comedies like Night Shift or Splash, but then he starts getting into weird stuff. Like he does Cocoon, he does Willow, and then he just backs off into things like Backdraft. So like there's the Backdraft, and then, like I said, Apollo 13's not long after that. Um, even into EdTV, and then into the 2000s is where you get Grinch, you get Beautiful Mind, you get Cinderella Man, and then you get all the Tom Hanks, Robert Langdon movies, The Da Vinci Code, Inferno, Lost Symbol, things like that. And then he does the Star Wars. He does the Han Solo prequel movie, which is just the strange thing.
Yeah.
And then he does stuff like Hillbilly Elegy, like these just strange turns where he just really isn't content to just do any one thing. Not that, any director is necessarily content to just do the same thing again and again, but like he really does take hard turns all around to do some weird things. And yeah, good stuff.
Well, Andrew, I think it's time. I think it's time we just jump into this film and talk about everything we enjoy, everything we like, all the positives of EdTV. You ready?
Yes.
When struggling cable network True TV decides they are going to broadcast someone's life 24/7 as their sole programming, they find the perfect candidate in Ed Perkerney. Soon, EdTV becomes a national phenomenon in large part because of some romantic drama between Ed and his brother's ex-girlfriend, Sherry. But when Sherry breaks it off due to their lack of privacy and unwanted criticism from strangers, EdTV attempts to move on with a new love interest. When Ed finally puts his foot down to end the show, the network explains that he can't end his contract, so Ed hatches a plan to get the show canceled and finally date Sherry in peace. I don't... Certainly this love, tension, drama, budding relationship is the core of this movie. I don't know if I'd call this like a rom-com, though.
No, I don't think I would. If only because,
It follows the formula where, like, oh, they should obviously be together. They get together, they separate, and then find their way back. But one thing I really like about it is it's not like revealed one was lying to the other, and that's why they separate and come back.
right. Like there's no
the typical.
There's nothing. There's nothing that was just a miscommunication that they should have talked about like adults that's
Yes.
standing in the way of it. Like there's very clearly an external force here that is driving the motivations that is completely logical and makes total sense. Like
they clearly care for each other the whole movie, which it's kind of refreshing.
And like the reason she leaves is just like, hey, I can't be followed on cameras 24 hours a day, which is completely valid. Like
Yes.
it's something. It's like, yeah, I can't blame anybody for not really wanting to put up with this. And so you've got, like you said, it's not really a will they, won't they, or like, are they going to figure it out? Like, and I guess there is a little bit of that because your motivation at a certain point stops being, are they going to get together? But it's, can Ed get out of it? It's like, it's not, what's going to happen once Ed gets out of it. The question is, can he find a way out of it? And that's the drama of the movie. And I think that's what stops it from being like a rom-com, because the resolution of the romance is not the driving force for the plot necessarily.
Well, we're going to get into that plot, all the twists and turns. But first, before we get to scenes, we got to talk about the cast of this film, as we do, starting with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the movie, because every episode we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who was getting your Mark Strong Award for EdTV?
There's some pretty good performances here. I do want to point that out, and we'll talk about them. But I am going to go with right straight to the top. I'm going to be going with the man himself, Matthew McConaughey, as the aforementioned Ed of EdTV, Edward Perkerney. He is our star. He is not just the star of this film, but the star of EdTV. And he's got a very interesting journey that he takes through this movie, because at the beginning, he's just kind of aloof, just kind of doing his thing, trying to live his life. He's a 31-year-old that works at a video store who's got seemingly no real greater motivations beyond that. I'm certain no one in our audience will feel called out by that, but it's and then he kind of stumbles into the show. He doesn't even necessarily set out for it. He kind of is like his brother is the one that wants to do it, and then he kind of ends up in one of the tapes, and they're like, well, maybe this is the guy, and then he ends up being the guy. And to start with, he kind of enjoys the novelty of it, but you slowly see this descent where he just becomes more and more detached, depressed, and just generally eventually turning to sort of anger as he can't get out of this. He's like, I'm stuck, basically. My life and the things that I now realize that I want to do, I can't do because I'm stuck doing this. And so there's a whole lot of emotions and quite a journey that the character makes through this. And I think Matthew McConaughey, who at this point in his career was probably seen by many as largely one note-ish. I don't know that there was a whole lot of performances in his filmography at this point that people were really clamoring about, which means they don't have eyes because they didn't see A Time to Kill. But it's a great performance. I think that really does kind of hold the movie together. And obviously, Matthew McConaughey, I don't think it's controversial at this point to say that he's great. I think he's
so good.
done.
He's
so good. Like, he's so good. And
he's always been good. I'm glad you bring up his career. Like, I don't know exactly what people were thinking in 99, but Matthew McConaughey, I swear, has had 3 careers. He has this initial career where he kind of like stumbles into acting. Like we mentioned, My Boyfriend's Back is 2 seconds there. It's technically his debut in a major film. He does Dazed and Confused the same year, where he wasn't even like trying to be an actor. He's like a friend of a friend. He's like, hey, you seem like you have a cool energy. Why don't you come in, do this quick scene or whatever? And he pops in that very small scene that he has there. Starts actually pursuing a job in acting and not a lot of hits early on. His Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie with Renee Zellweger is kind of infamous now because it's before they both really hit it big. But yeah, you mentioned A Time to Kill. That's kind of like his big stage debut as a dramatic actor. He is excellent in that movie. He's in Contact shortly after that, where he's another great role. He does this, so he's kind of like just this working actor. He's had some good performances, but he's not really standing out. He's just kind of like another guy working his way up.
Which is weird because I think I will say this, like, Time to Kill is like a great performance by him. And this doesn't even touch on the fact that the same year he does A Time to Kill, he does Lone Star, which is the John Sayles film where he is the star. He's one of the stars. It's him and Chris Cooper. But again, that's like him front and center. And like, if you asked me what part of his career Lone Star comes from, I would assume it was so much later. Like, it is not 3 years after Dazed and Confused, but Lone Star is. And so it's why, like, you look at something like that and it just seems so out of character. But yeah, so continue on your path.
So
in '96, he's really good.
He kind of starts elevating to like action roles, trying to figure out where his place is. Frailty is like a horror film. Reign of Fire. And then 2003, everything changes. A little movie called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Huge rom-com, blows up, and this becomes his gear for like the next 10 years. These like rom-com movies where this is where I think he gets the one note thing. Like, he's just the charming guy who does the same formulaic rom-com over and over again. Things like Failure to Launch and what's the one?
Ghosts of Girlfriend's Past.
One. The Wedding Planner, is that him? Is he in that one? I'm literally looking at his
The Wedding Planner is actually before How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Oh, okay. So maybe yeah, there it is. Yeah,
but you got Wedding Planner, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. You've got Failure to Launch. You've got Fool's Gold. You've got Ghosts of Girlfriend's Past. You've got even things like Surfer Dude, where he's just kind of taking the piss out of himself, basically. Like, you've got these things where, like, but yeah, and it's weird because, like, mixed in, and then there's other stuff like, you get Sahara mixed in there, which is him kind of doing like a Brendan Fraser-esque action adventure. They don't really take
anytime
movie,
he strays from that rom-com thing, it doesn't really take off.
But there's still, I guess the point more so is it's like he's still playing the same like type of character. Like, there's not necessarily a romantic subplot, but like in something like Sahara, he's very much playing the same type of guy he would play in a Fool's Gold or a How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, where just a very surface level himbo, for lack of a better word. Like, he's just a really good looking dude who's kind of dumb. Like, that's kind of what his thing was. And
I distinctly remember seeing The Lincoln Lawyer in theaters. Like, whatever, it's Matthew McConaughey. And I'm like, wait, like halfway through, I'm like
Great.
looking around, like, wait a minute, this is a pretty good movie.
This
And
is
like,
great.
like he can act. Like, what's going on here? And then he does Mud the next year, and I'm like, where did this bug? Like, I'm at this point probably ignorant of those early roles. You know, I just know him as the rom-com guy. Then I see him in Mud, and I'm like, wow, this guy can like do stuff. And of course, Dallas Buyers Club in 2013 is like his
Like prestige role, like that takes him
it's
back
like,
to like
it's what blows up this career 3 that I'm talking about. And since then, he's been like this super compelling dramatic actor. Interstellar or True Detective. I mean, like people are no longer surprised by where he's able to go with his abilities. Like it is insane. I remember you seeing some of his early movies and being like, you could have done this whole time, and you did 10 years of those rom-coms, and now you look at the thing as a whole. Like, I can't criticize this guy's career. He's been raking
get paid, dude.
Yeah,
Get paid. Like,
absolutely. But
man,
it turns out he's just a fantastic actor.
Turns out, like the same year he does Lincoln Lawyer, he also does a movie called Killer Joe, which is a William Friedkin movie based off of a play by Tracy Letts. And that's another one. Like that's before Mud, but it's the same kind of. But that one's more of like a crime film. Killer Joe is, but he's great in that too. And obviously, you got William Friedkin directing, who's did The Exorcist and a few other things. He's pretty well known, but it's kind of insane to look at what's going on there. And then he's even done some voice stuff with doing things in like Sing and Kubo and the Two Strings. He did what's the one I'm thinking of? Obviously there's the Magic Mike of it all, which is probably like that weird like it's almost like this weird PS to that like rom-com era.
It like connects the two
because like it's right before Dallas Buyers Club, but like it's this kind of odd. We're like clearly we've got him here because he's really attractive, but also it's just a little bit of a step above what you'd kind of expect from a Matthew McConaughey movie at the time, and then that gives away right into like he does Dallas Buyers Club and The Wolf of Wall Street in the same year, and both of those are very known roles, and then obviously Interstellar the next year, and then nowadays, like you said, he can kind of do whatever he wants and kind of take it to wherever he wants to go. And he did The Gentleman in 2019, which was a Guy Ritchie movie that I absolutely love. He's, I guess if there is a star of that movie, it's him. But it's also got Charlie Hunnam and Henry Golding and Jeremy Strong and Colin Farrell and Hugh Grant and all sorts of other people. It's absolutely...
Is that a TV show now? I feel like
it is now. It is now. They made a TV show of it on Netflix, but someone was telling me about it, and I'm like, that's a movie, right? Like I've heard it's a good movie. I didn't know. Is it still Guy Ritchie? Is it any returning cast? It is Guy Ritchie. He created the show, and I think he directed the first 2 episodes. But my understanding is that like nobody is. I don't think anybody's coming back, or if it is, it's not anybody that's like known as the. It's not anybody that's like from the original movie. I haven't watched the show yet, to be fair. I just know that it's kind of its own separate thing, just sort of in that same world. And I have to give it a shot. But like Colin Farrell's character, especially in The Gentleman, is just, he's so good. It's one of those things where you're just like, wow, turns out Colin Farrell also pretty good at this. But
Still gotta watch it. You recommended it to me a million times, but I gotta check it out.
I wouldn't say it's the greatest movie of all time, but it's very entertaining, and it's a movie that kind of knows exactly what it is and what it's trying to do. And
I mean, that's Guy Ritchie at his best, right? Yeah, I'm not saying it's the greatest movie ever, but it's entertaining as hell. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, it knows exactly what it is. And so anyway, Matthew McConaughey, the long and short of it, turns out dude's pretty good.
Pretty good actor. I love, in particular, his casting here because he's got to be a believable everyman. And while he is a very attractive fellow, a little scruff on him, it kind of just looks like an everyday dude. Got the short haircut. Like he's buyable. Sometimes whenever you have, this is common in movies. You have a movie star playing a quote unquote average Joe. Like Tom Cruise in the beginning of what's the alien movie? War of the Worlds. Where he's like working on a crane and like wearing a ball cap. Like you're a movie star sitting a heavy machine. Like I like the movie. I like Tom Cruise movies, and
it just reminds me of that line from I think it's the second Ant-Man, where like they walk onto the school and they put on like baseball hats and sunglasses, and he's like, we're in disguise. He's like, no, we look like celebrities at a baseball game. Like that's
Yes.
that's how Tom Cruise looks anytime he's trying to play a quote unquote normal person.
But I think Matthew McConaughey can actually pull it off, and I love them picking him as the star of this show, because it's like he obviously just has this natural. He's got the riz, as we would say now. He's got that natural charisma. He can just tell simple stories, but you're leaning in close to listen because of the way he's telling them with his distinct Texan accent and just his charm. It's just really, really great casting. So I think it's totally respectable, totally deserving of the Mark Strong Award. Dude's doing a lot of heavy lifting. He's in virtually every scene of this movie. So working his tail off, Andrew. I like it. I respect it. I'm going somewhere else with my Mark Strong Award. Andrew, I'm watching this movie, and there's one character, this one actor that is making me laugh every time they're on screen. And not a ton of screen time, and I'm thinking, like, I really like this character. I really like this performance. But, like, is this a Mark Strong Award just because they're funny all the time? And then there's this one key dramatic scene, and I go, that's it. You earned it. That's the Mark Strong Award. It's going to Martin Landau as Al. This is Ed's stepfather in the film. He's wheelchair bound. He's got to use an oxygen tank a lot. Tons of jokes, mostly from him, about him having one foot in the grave. He is just effortlessly hilarious. Alum of the show. We talked about him back on Ready to Rumble, where he is also playing a comedic role. And and the dude has an insane decades-long career, but here at the end, just slipping into these comedic performances so effortlessly. It reminds me a lot of like Burgess Meredith and like the Grumpy Old Men movies. Same kind of energy. Ed's like looking for his mom, and he's like, I would yell for her, but I'd die. Just so
that was so
matter of
the
fact.
way he delivered that. That's the only energy I can hope to have when I'm that old, is just to literally be making things like that, where it'd be like, yeah, but it would kill me. But Martin Landau is absolutely fantastic. I think this is a great pick. Like, I know there's like scenes, like I know you're going to talk about it a lot more, but just absolutely wonderful performance.
Yeah, he at one point they're at the hospital, and he's like, I gotta pee. Wish me luck. It just wheels off. It's so effortless. It's so good. But I'll talk about the big dramatic scene, I guess, when we get to scenes. But it's just one small key performance that's like, there's something beneath the comedy. There's another gear you can go into here. Like, you're not just a funny old man, which is great if that's all it was. But the dude's a bona fide actor and legend of the screen. R.I.P. of course at this point, but love that performance here. He's the secret sauce of this movie, getting my Mark Strong Award.
He was 89 when he passed in 2017, which means that when he made this movie, this was what, 99? So he was 70. That's
Good for
like,
him.
that's crazy for me to think that at 70 he's playing a character that's like 1 foot in the grave now, when like
Yeah.
Harrison Ford is over 80 and still playing like
That's so
Indiana
weird.
Jones.
I'm kind of fascinated by clearly Martin Landau just loves movies, loves acting. Like, why is the dude still making movies? Like, I texted you the other day because I'm watching Law and Order, and Stabler's mom is played by
Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen Burstyn. And I looked up her age; she's like 91, I think. Doing an excellent job, but like, what are you doing making a TV show like every week? Like, you don't have to. It's clearly not for money. It's got to be for, I don't know, passion. This is what I know. This is what I love. That
Well,
got more to
and
give.
acting is, I don't know, what's the tactful way of what I'm trying to say, Chris? Like, you can act into your 90s, and it's not like impacting your quality of life. Like, you're not hurting yourself by acting as long as you want. And I guess, why not? If you enjoy it and you're capable.
But you're clearly getting something out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
you or I
it's fulfilling in a
win the
way.
lottery, we're not going back to our job the next day, more or less. Most people wouldn't go to the job if they didn't need to do it for money. So clearly, there's something. I also think acting is a job that, like, if you dedicate your life to it, becomes part of your identity, and that's got to be hard to give up. I don't know. I find it interesting. Yeah, Martin Landau, Mark Strong Award winner. Happy to say it. Andrew, we've said it already. Pretty good cast they assembled here. We have Jenna Elfman as Sherry, the love interest of the film, star of Dharma and Greg. I got to think that's her, what most people are going to know her from in 1999, but certainly had a few movie roles there at the time as well. And I've always really liked. I remember watching Dharma and Greg back in the day. I remember seeing this. Well, I guess I don't remember seeing this, but I remember seeing Jenna Elfman pop up in various things, and I always thought she was great, very likable, very pretty, great actor.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having a real bit part in Grosse Point Blank, the John Cusack film back in the late 90s, where John Cusack was also kind of going through his strange heartthrob phase.
Dude, I remember her from Krippendorf's Tribe. Do you remember that movie?
I remember the movie. That's a choice.
That's got it. So pre 9/11, right? Like, there's no way anything about that movie holds up. He makes up an African tribe to it's insane.
It's absolutely nuts. I also remember her bit part in Can't Hardly Wait, which was one of the many, I don't know, a lot of people that are my age, like, remember Can't Hardly Wait as like this big thing where they were like, man, but I guess it was just the right movie at the right time, because I rewatched it not too long ago and I was like, man, it's one of those reminders that the memories of us when we're younger are not trustworthy, because you rewatch it and you're like, this ain't it.
I wish Josie and the Pussycats had the legacy that Can't Hardly Wait does.
That, I completely agree with that. Can't Hardly Wait is like a whole bunch of people who like went on to be decently more famous together in a movie, and it's like it's just the exact right moment for everything. But yeah, Josie and the Pussycats deserves that legacy much more. Anyway, Jenna Elfman's great. She's doing a great job here. Like you said, she has to play off Matthew McConaughey's struggle, and like you feel her pain as she's like, I'm just trying to the idea that I'm just trying to exist. I can't add this on top of it with everything else that's going on. It's like, I want this, but at what cost?
Yeah,
it's
and like, the fact that it's the woman in this show that gets all the intense criticism and hate and stuff, who's doing the same thing as the other people featured in the show. That's one of the layers of this movie that I didn't expect, that it feels very modern internet to me, that I don't even know if they were trying to really predict it, but like, this movie legitimately has something to say about the way women are treated in the spotlight or in the workplace. We haven't gotten to Ellen DeGeneres' whole plot in this movie. She definitely has something to say about women in business and how they're viewed by their male superiors.
Well, Ellen DeGeneres herself has something to say about the treatment of people in business too. So there's a whole wonderful conversation there too.
We will maybe approach that when we talk about her. But I think this movie addresses those things in a way where it doesn't shy away from it, but it also doesn't like shove it in your face. It doesn't feel like this is the focus of the movie. And that's not a criticism of movies that are overt about their message on feminism or treatment of women. That's fine. I'm just saying this movie does it in a way where if you were to show this to someone who would say, oh, I don't, watch movies with social justice warrior commentary in them, they could watch this and enjoy it because they're not, it's just, it's on a layer that they will, miss if they're not looking for it. But at the same time, like I said, it doesn't shy away from the conversation. I feel like it addresses it all pretty head on.
Yeah, generally, I would agree with that. But the problem now is that people create the whole woke argument about, like, if Alien, the exact same movie, Alien, was released today, as it was in 1979, today, people would call it woke because the woman is smarter than all the men on the show. And she's the one that survives. Aliens, even worse. They would be like, oh, this woman survives instead of all the trained military operatives. Shut up. You people are the worst. I know you're not really listening, so I'm not really concerned about talking directly at you.
These aren't our listeners.
These aren't our listeners. You people are on the same wavelength as us. But But that somebody, I feel like I saw that, I read that somewhere where somebody straight up said, like, the guy even said, he's like, well, if Alien were released today, you would just really have to question the motivation of making it. And it would be like, why? Like, the idea that back then, if you made a movie with a woman that was smarter than everyone and was more capable and is the only survivor, it meant you weren't doing it for the wrong reasons. And today you would be doing it for the wrong reasons. It's like, okay, go sit down now and never speak again.
Think about what you said. Really digest it.
I need you to really digest it. And then when you think you finally uncracked it, don't tell me. Just continue not speaking. Anyway, I agree overall. Yeah, you would watch this at first glance and it doesn't feel like it's the driving force, but it is definitely a recurring plot point throughout that I think is handled pretty well.
Woody Harrelson plays Ray Pickerney. This is Ed's brother. Andrew, Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson are playing brothers in 1999. This is fantastic. I normally we don't text too much about the movie as we're watching it before we do the podcast, but I couldn't help it. I'm like, dude, this casting, these brothers, like, it's the True Detectives. They were together years ago. I didn't even know. And you got,
in fact, if you view True Detective as a sequel to EdTV, it makes it even more interesting.
Kind of bizarre how they meet and don't know each other in that first episode, but
they're just pretending.
Yeah, that's what it is. Man, I love Woody Harrelson. What do you even call him? Is he a character actor, Andrew? I don't know. He's just Woody. He's like an A-list top star, but I know him mostly from supporting roles, almost exclusively in supporting roles. He kills it all the time. He's always, I wouldn't say he plays the same character every time, but he's certainly a Woody Harrelson every time. In this movie in particular, he's got strong white men can't jump energy. He's got even the tank tops that he wears. He's still got a little bit of hair on top of his head. I love this dude. This character sucks. He's supposed to be a guy that you don't like. But Woody Harrelson's great. And the casting of him as Matthew McConaughey's brother, I love it.
Alum of the show, possible Mark Strong Award winner from Venom 2?
I feel like he had to have picked one up.
I think I gave it to him. I think
There's no way for us to check, but yeah, probably.
There's no way to check. There's absolutely no way to check. So probable Mark Strong Award winner Woody Harrelson. Yeah, and I definitely had the moment I was watching. I was like, oh, the True Detectives are brothers. The true mystery is how they forgot about each other. And they just don't even address that in True Detective, which is a bummer. But yeah, Woody Harrelson's great. Almost, whether, I remember him, obviously, I think he got kind of a resurgence when he did Zombieland. I think that kind of resurged him to a lot of our generation, possibly.
Well, what came out first, Zombieland or
Hunger Games?
Dude, no, God, I'm getting old, Andrew. I can't believe I can't remember the name of this movie. Anton Chigurh. What movie is that? Coen Brothers.
Oh, friggin' heck.
We're both old. Why can't we think of the name of this movie?
No Country for Old Men?
Thank you. Oh my God. Someone was screaming at their phone.
No Country for Old Men is slightly before. I think No Country is 07, Zombieland is 09.
Both of those movies, I think, definitely elevated his.
It definitely wasn't Semi-Pro that was making him.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that was a resurgence for anybody. But hashtag PP. But yeah, I mean, and then since then he did Zombieland. He was in all the Hunger Games movies. He was in those Now You See Me movies, which I wasn't really a big fan of, but apparently they did really well. They made a ton of money. And then he did weird stuff where he'd play Lyndon B. Johnson, and then he was in Solo, a Star Wars story, and then he was in the Venom movies, and then he was in the Zombieland sequel. So he's out there doing his thing to do, for lack of a better way to put it. I mean, he's still out there, still doing his thing, still out there. He was even just recently in The White House Plumbers, which is a show about the Watergate masterminds, basically. They were called the Plumbers because they were fixers. Get it?
Got it. I got it. Hey, Andrew, I got it. Ellen DeGeneres, we mentioned her earlier. She plays a character named Cynthia. This is probably how I know that I didn't actually see this movie before and just thought I did. I thought in my brain that she was the love interest of this movie. I just remembered that it was Matthew McConaughey and Ellen DeGeneres, and I guess this is technically after she came out, though. So, she could have done it. They probably wouldn't have cast her. God. Okay, in 1999, in pre, let's say 2010, I don't know. I used to really like Ellen DeGeneres. Her HBO comedy specials, I think, are very funny. I remember watching her sitcom back in the day when she first launched her talk show. Like, my mom loved it. I'd watch it. I just always thought she was just like a very funny person. In this movie, I think she's very funny. She's just effortlessly throws out these one-liners. I love that her character, every time we see her in her house, she is working out and or smoking. Like, that juxtaposition that she's like chain smoking, but also like on a different piece of exercise equipment every time we see her, I think is very funny. And she gets a big, not redeeming, but a vindicating moment at the end of this movie where she stands up.
A little
to
bit
her
of
boss.
catharsis.
Yeah. So, like, all good things to say about her performance here and her status in my mind in the late 90s. But as you alluded to, Andrew, there's no shortage of stories out there about Ellen DeGeneres and how she treated her staff on that show. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. I think it's even beyond that. It's like pretty much everyone has accepted that she's probably a terrible person to deal with. I watched her on Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is a show I enjoy. I mean, the host of that show has their own issues. God, why is everyone awful, Andrew? But in her episode, she just seemed so resentful of her TV show audience. Like, she thought of herself as a comedian, and she didn't like dealing with that crowd, and like did a comedy show, but made a point not to mention it on her TV show because she didn't want those fans showing up. And it's really like, she just seems so unhappy, which sounds kind of sad. Or it would be if it weren't for all these stories about her being awful to underpaid staff. So, yeah, can't heap too much praise on her as a person, but I like her performance in this movie. Hashtag PP.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to put it. Far greater and more articulate and smarter minds than I have told you everything you need to hear about Ellen DeGeneres. It's out there. You can find it. But
Ellen did not generous. I mean, really.
More like Ellen ungenerous. Am I right? Am I right, folks? Am I right? Wow, tough crowd.
This thing on?
This thing on? Ooh, wow. What a terrific audience. Anyway, yeah, she's got an interesting character here because she's kind of originally the mastermind of this, and then eventually becomes far more sympathetic to Ed's kind of plight, if you'll call it, of just this idea that maybe we're taking this too far. And because originally she has to like force the network to do this and she has to sell them on it. Yeah. And they're initially super hesitant and they're kind of like, ugh, like this really is this what we're doing? And then it's successful. And then the whole dichotomy changes. Suddenly those same people are like, oh, well, now we got to do this. Now they're trying to like engineer storylines for it. They're trying to like start having more control over it. And she's kind of like, well, no, now we're not just letting him live his life now. We're now like deciding what his life is. And she eventually turns around. So she's got a real interesting arc here too. Obviously, she's, still culpable in many ways, but ultimately plays a big part in ultimately getting Ed free from the show. So yeah, a really interesting character with a good arc. Ellen is what Ellen is. There's not much more to say there.
Sally Kirkland plays Jeanette Pickerney. This is Ed's mom, Al's wife, and I really like this character in performance. And she is interestingly layered. She is very supportive of her sons, and she gets all zhuzhed up the first time she's on TV trying to make a big performance. But there's also all this stuff going on where we find out that she might not have been truthful to the kids about why their dad is no longer in their life. She made it sound very black and white. He abandoned us. He left you. But then she says, oh, well, he cheated on me and I threw him out. But also she might have started seeing Al before they were actually separated. It's a whole kind of mess. We hear a few different versions of it and never really get to the bottom of it. I think her character is kind of the key to the message of this movie, which is like, everyone's a little messy. If you were to dive into any family to this level where you're monitoring them 24/7, all their conversations, you would start to uncover some stuff that doesn't look great in the limelight, and you're going to get unharshly judged by your worst qualities to the public. Again, this movie is predicting social media. But I think her character in particular, like, I think she's sweet. I like her. She's clearly made some mistakes, but tried her best. She's not black and white. Like, it's, again, the point of this movie, like, everyone just has layers. And I think that's best exemplified in her character. And the scene where Ed is trying to get the truth out of her, and she is like having a hard time holding it together and telling different versions, or walking out of the room, walking back in to try to fix it, like frantic. Like, it's kind of humorous, but mostly it's sad. Like, it's watching someone try to like connect with their son and be truthful and tell the story. All these cameras in their face, like it's rough. But I think the performance wise, just excellent. Like, selling that distraught, frantic nature. I think she just does a really good job at that.
I agree completely, because like there's so many things happening with that scene, because she's realizing that like the lies have come unwound. So she's like, the story I've been telling is now no longer truthful. And so she already knows that she's kind of against the ropes in a way with this going on here. And so she's trying to cover, she's trying to pivot, she's trying to make adjustments, but also seems like keenly aware that the more she does that, the worse she looks on television. And so she like leaves the room to get out, but then she realizes that just also doesn't help. So she comes back and tries to fix it. Like you said, it's this endless sequence of like pivoting and adjusting and trying to fix it and breaking it even more and going back.
And her
and
refrigerator is getting repaired at the same time.
And imagine a day where you would simply replace a coil on a fridge for $150 instead of just buying a new fridge. But everyone just buys a new fridge now. Anyway, like it's a really great scene, and I think it speaks to her performance, and it speaks to you, like you said, when you put anybody under a microscope, you're gonna find stuff, and the more you analyze it, the tougher and tougher it gets. And I think this scene in particular is really, really good. So I agree, it's a great performance. She's got a legendary career. You can look it up and see bit parts on television shows all the way back to the 60s and 70s, and even is still appearing in movies today. So cool.
And Elizabeth Hurley is in this film as Jill. I think she was everywhere in the late 90s, early 2000s. Liz Hurley, of course, known model turned actor. I know her probably most from Bedazzled, which isn't exactly a hit, but one that I'm very familiar with. I think she's great here. Perfectly cast. I mean, she's playing a model who gets hired to be an actor, basically. It's pretty close to what's going on in her real life at the time. But she is the person that has a chance encounter with Ed. There's some chemistry. The audience likes her. So once Sherry leaves the show, they're not, well, I guess they are pretty overt about it. She gets hired to come be his romantic interest. Like, it's definitely manufactured. She's doing it because she clearly has some kind of contract to come on to him and try to be the new girlfriend. Ultimately, it doesn't work out for very 1999 reasons. But again, great casting. I mean, she's Andrew, she's believable as a supermodel. Can you believe that? Turns
out, yeah. It's Elizabeth Hurley hired to play Elizabeth Hurley, basically. And that scene where she's like making out with Ed and everybody's like, "Ooh, how deep is this gonna go?" But like the fact that she like keeps looking at the camera every like 5 seconds, just trying to play it up, like she's not just playing a part; she's trying to sell herself on top of everything else. And so, yeah, that's the moments where you start getting into where it's, Ed's not in on this. Like, Ed doesn't know that she's just been hired and things like that plays interest. So you're starting to get into those layers of the show where we are leaning a little bit more towards the Truman Show style there. But yeah, she's got and then even in the immediate aftermath of the kind of mishap, she uses it to launch her brand. Basically, she's famous now because of what happened on EdTV. So,
Rob Reiner plays Mr. Whitaker. He shows up early in this movie. My first note is actually, is that Rob Reiner? Because he's like a network executive. And I guess I looked at his kind of credits. He's acted a handful of times, but he's known as a director. I mean, he's got a legendary decade-long directing career, but he is not just a cameo in this movie. He's a legit supporting character. Again, he's the network executive. He's the one that greenlights the show begrudgingly. But once it starts taking off, takes full credit for it. Totally shuts out Ellen DeGeneres' character. Says, yeah, it was my idea. And he's unwilling to let Ed out of his contract. I mean, he is just a pretty gross profits over everything type network executive who gets his comeuppance at the end of the movie, the aforementioned scene we talked about as we were discussing Ellen DeGeneres' character. But he does a good job. I mean, he's sleazy and gross and unlikable, smiling through his teeth all the way. Although he's a horrible character, but he definitely made me laugh at times.
Yeah.
There's a scene where he just says some horrible things like about women and about Sherry, and at the end, like they're waiting on their lunch, he looks around the boardroom and he goes, "Is lunch literally coming from China? I don't understand."
Yeah, like
it's one of those like off-color things that like it's not technically what am I trying to say? It's not necessarily offensive, but like I wouldn't say that. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but
it's a little crass, a little crude.
Crass. That's a good way to put it. But it made me laugh though. I gotta say, I thought it was pretty funny.
I mean, turns out Rob Reiner, kind of a funny guy. I like Liz and I know him probably like most heavily. He was on New Girl. He played God, what's the main character's dad on that show? The main character on that show.
Jess?
Yes. So Jess.
I literally don't watch that show, but I know the theme song says it's Jess. So
yeah. So Rob Reiner appears as her dad in a couple of episodes. I think like 10 or so over the course of a good decent run there. And there's this scene where he's talking about building the perfect sandwich. And he's laying it out to like one of the other characters, and he's like, whoa, this is all wrong. And I don't even remember what the other pieces are, but when he gets to the middle, he just goes, meat, cheese, lettuce. And he's like, that's a perfect sandwich. So like this image in my head exists perpetually of Rob Reiner saying meat like 8 times in a row because that's what he does. But yeah, so he like, it's weird to see him show up. But ironically enough, talking about directors who are not content to do just one thing. I was just looking at Rob Reiner's filmography real quick. You've got this run here where he does This Is Spinal Tap, The Sure Thing, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men. Like that's his run from 84 to 92. And that is about as wide a range of movies as you can get for a lot of stuff. Yeah.
I wish I could remember who said it, but I'm an old man now. I can't remember these things. But someone said Rob Reiner is the best director. God, I wish I knew who it was. But they said he doesn't get the credit for it because that's how good he is. He doesn't draw attention to himself. He's just so insanely good at making the film. I don't necessarily agree that he's the greatest director, but I do think
there's an interesting logic there. There's like an interesting logic going on there of the idea that by being such a good director, you don't make it about yourself. Basically, you're making it about the movie instead.
That was the point they were making. Yeah,
like something like say Oppenheimer. Like Cillian Murphy, great at Oppenheimer, but like you can't watch Oppenheimer without knowing that it's a Christopher Nolan movie. His trademark fingerprints are all over it. It's a Nolan movie. And people may be like, that's the point. He has his things that he likes doing that puts a stamp on the movie. And they would probably be like, well, if the director doesn't leave any impression, did he make a good movie? And the answer is, well, yeah. Like you talk about just journeyman directors in general. It's like they make perfectly good, even great movies all the time. But there's an interesting lot. Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree with it either, but there's an interesting thought there of just like, you're so good at directing that you let the film speak for itself. Like, you don't have to go in being like, this is Rob Reiner's latest, which I don't know that anybody's ever said that. But no offense to the man. Outside maybe Spinal Tap 2. That might be the one thing where people are finally like, guys, it's time to go watch a Rob Reiner movie.
Is that something that's happening?
It is. It is.
What?
It is with all of them. They're all in tow.
My God. Okay.
And it's going to be... And the thing is like, I'm curious how meta they'll go with it, because obviously there's the commentary on like legacy sequels and like dusting things up, but then there's also that whole commentary of like a band that just won't give it up, and clearly like there's a very real commentary to be made on like a band that just doesn't know when to call it quits, or will just keeps trying to do the same thing. And so there's actually a really possible chance, I won't say a high chance necessarily, that movie could be... First off, it's the Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, Harry Shearer, and Rob Reiner all making the movie again. Like, I know I'm going to laugh at the four of them together. Like, there's no way I'm not going to. Like, I definitely will laugh. But there's a chance that they could... I don't know that it'll be to the level of Spinal Tap, but they could do something pretty fun and potentially special if they do it properly, which I would like to think they would. They wouldn't just do it for the heck of it. I would like to think they'll do it because they actually think there's something funny to do. But yeah, and even Rob Reiner would reteam with Woody Harrelson in 2016 for the aforementioned Lyndon Baines Johnson movie, because that's apparently what you do in 2016, is make a movie about LBJ starring Woody Harrelson.
Dennis Hopper is in this movie. Legend of the screen, Mark Strong Award winner and alum of the show, Dennis Hopper. Andrew, if it wasn't Dennis Hopper, I probably wouldn't be bringing this character up right now, because they literally have 2 scenes. But he plays Ed's dad, the one I talked about earlier, that maybe he walked out, maybe he was thrown out. There's some controversy back there. He tracks down his son. He's possibly only doing it because the son is famous now. We don't really get to the bottom of it, and his character dies not too long after we meet him. This is, I would say, stunt casting. I mean, like, you want that wow factor when you see Dennis Hopper on the screen, because again, it is such a small role from the perspective of screen time. But I'm not disappointed to see Dennis Hopper, because I think he's great.
Now, I don't know if you know this, Chris. Did you know that Dennis Hopper was supposed to play Kristoff in Truman Show?
Kristoff, is that the director?
That's Ed Harris.
Interesting.
So Dennis Hopper wasn't just supposed to play that character. He was cast and left during filming because of creative differences with, they called it creative differences, but there was a whole big to-do about that. So I do find it a little ironic that he was supposed to be essentially the antagonist of Truman Show and, be a large character and a central presence in that movie, and then ultimately comes into EdTV where he's in 2 scenes, playing Ed's dad. But it is very interesting. I don't want to talk about his scene too much, because I feel like I'm about to talk about one of them in a little bit. So I'm going to save all that. But I will say that despite the fact that he is only in a few number of scenes, he does use his tremendous acting talent in those scenes to great effect. So, yes. But of course, I mean, it definitely feels like stunt casting. So
yeah, of course, R.I.P. to Dennis Hopper, great Dennis Hopper. Yep. I think that covers our main players here. Adam Goldberg plays a character he's not unfamiliar with playing, the neurotic friend of the main character.
That's all Adam Goldberg ever plays.
That's his
never
bread and
not
butter.
that.
He's good at it though, Andrew. But let's jump into this movie. I'm excited to talk about it. Let's talk about the best scenes of EdTV. And of course, you know what we're doing here, talking about the best scene of the movie first. So Andrew, kick us off here. When is this movie firing in all cylinders? What's the best scene in EdTV?
So this may be seen as an odd choice, but I will be going with the second scene between Ed and his dad, the one in his dad's pseudo hotel apartment room, because this is post blow up with his mom. So he's run into his dad. He's had a conversation. His dad has given his side of the story. And this is where we get that scene we mentioned with Sally Kirkland, where she's like all over the place because she can't keep the story straight at this point. The lies have come crumbling down, and even she may not know what's true anymore. But she's still giving these kind of weird answers that make him question what his dad is saying. And so he goes back there, and like the cameras are there, and you can tell at this point that his dad's kind of putting on a show. But there's a moment in this scene that probably it's possibly the one moment from this movie that's like etched in my brain forever now. And it's where, you know, his dad's talking to me. He's like, I remember all of it. I remember this. I remember when I took you to Houston to go see the Astros play the Dodgers. And he's like, I remember you were jumping. Like, he's describing this scene of Ed as a kid in such like detail. And you're like, yeah, and it's you're on his side at this point, because you're like, he's been wrong. Like, he got shoved out of his kid's life unfairly. It's not right. Like, he's got these memories. He wants to be a hero. You're almost there. Like, you're like 85% of the way to being completely on his dad's side and believing that, you know, this man is genuine. He's you know, he feels wronged, and he sees this as a chance to possibly put things the right way. And then Ed just says, that was Ray. And the look on Dennis Hopper's face it's just completely blank. You see the actual like genuine heartbreak on Matthew McConaughey's face, where like, you know, his dad just told this great loving story that's not about him. And not just is it not about him, he specifically told Ed that he couldn't come on this trip. And that moment was just, man, like, first off, it was like getting get punched in the gut. I was just like, whoa. Like, the wind completely got taken out of the room, like in the movie, but then just generally from like a performance perspective, like everybody in that moment was doing exactly what needed to be done. Because like I said, there's still that hint that Dennis Hopper is not being completely genuine. But through the story he's telling and the details he's giving, you're almost on his side. But then, bam, like Matthew McConaughey is just like, that wasn't me. And the scene just changes. At that point, he knows that his dad really can't be trusted either. And at that moment, you can see it on his face. Ed's kind of like, am I alone? Like, am I by myself? Because like, he can't trust his mom. He can't trust his dad. His brother doesn't like him. Obviously, Al is still there, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, I'm sure. But and then he kind of gives this half-hearted, hey, give my dad a job if you can, blah, blah, blah. But the emotion's gone. It's very robotic, very kind of through the motions. And yeah, it just, that stuck in my brain. Like, there's great scenes in this movie, and this one scene's not even that long, but just like that one moment, I was just like, whoa. I was like, that was, because the scene with his mom is so chaotic, and it's so insane and back and forth and over the top by design. That's how it's supposed to be. This one is just, it's almost so simple in its execution that the impact was that much heavier, because like, there's nowhere to turn, there's nowhere to look, there's nowhere to anything. His dad just is wrong, remembers the wrong story. And the heartbreak on McConaughey's face, the kind of, oh crap, I've been caught look on Dennis Hopper's face, like, it all comes together perfectly. Great scene.
Great pick. Yeah, it's super effective. And the way he's like, that was Ray, and Dennis Hopper says, oh yeah, Ray was
the older one.
And it's like, he's,
oh man, like, it just completely
can't even keep
shatters
his kids
apart.
straight.
Yeah.
Like, it's so heartbreaking.
It's like, it's just so, like, you're, like I said, you're almost there, you're almost on his side, and then boom, it's just gone. Like, the rug is just completely pulled out.
I'm kind of reminded of that scene in Shazam when Billy Batson gives the compass to his mom that's meant so much to him, when they're finally reunited, and she goes, what is this? Why are you giving me this? And just doesn't remember giving him that, but it's meant everything to him his whole life. But like, yeah, like this realization that like your parent doesn't see you that way, to mean the same thing to you like they mean to you, like it's rough, it's hard. And yeah, it's super, I mean, on
a base level, just the notion that something that means everything to you means nothing to somebody else is just a tough lesson. And when you compound that by making it about family, or in this case, you've attached significance to something because it's like your only memory of said person, it makes it all the tougher. But yeah, it's woof.
Yeah, tough. And he does do that little pitch, like, hey, my dad could use some help. If you can hire him, I'll give you a plug on my show or whatever. And to me, that's just like, Ed's a good dude. Like, that's his dad.
Like I said, it's very
like, it's just
by the motions, but he's still doing it. Like, he's still doing it. Like,
yeah. Man, that's a great pick. You almost, I mean, my best scene, I'm kind of had this like nebulous cluster of scenes that I want to join together. I think you've kind of swayed me to pick this. Like the records can show that I'm agreeing with you. This is the best scene, but the ones I really wanted to highlight are basically everything that follows this. And again, that's my favorite scene because
it's like an hour of the movie after this, Chris.
There's a cluster. Let's say from that moment to like whenever Sherry comes back into the movie. That's kind of the next segment. But until then, you have shortly after that. Ed's mom calls him and says, "Your dad has died." He rushes to the hospital because she clearly said, like in the last scene, Al is your dad. He's the one that was there. So he goes to the hospital. The doctor's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, he passed away, but he passed away having sex with your mom. What a way to go." And then Al wheels around the corner. He's like, "Oh, Al, you're alive." And then it kind of hits that the mom went back, saw his dad. They got together. He got a heart attack and died. And there's just such a mix of like ridiculousness and comedic, and really what I'm in awe of is the world that we've built with this family. Like we can get to a point where we can have all these moving pieces and keep track of it all, and people can do objectively bad things like cheat on their spouse, but you don't hate that character because they're so fleshed out and three-dimensional. It's just, I'm kind of in awe that the script has gotten to that point. So this hospital scene, even though Dennis Hopper's character has died and the mom is cheated on Al, overall is very funny. He died having sex. That's pretty funny. This is when Al says, "I gotta piss, wish me luck." And this is when Ed tries to have a private conversation with his mom, but of course cameras are there. He's like, "Mom, they told me what happened. You had sex with him?" She's like, "What? You said that on TV?" And she realizes that it's gotten out. He's like, "How could you do that?" And then real loud, she goes, "Al can't have sex." Like, all loud in front of the cameras. It's very funny. We move from this, though, to a funeral, to Hank's funeral. And this is very touching. This is like it's hard to say what's the most emotional scene between what we just highlighted as a favorite scene and this one here. But the first thing I took notice of here is that Ed is watching the funeral from a distance. He's behind the gates of the cemetery because the cameras following him around. If he actually goes to the service for his dad, there's going to be no privacy. He's putting everyone else in an awkward position. So he makes the sacrifice to attend the funeral, but not be there for the service, which is just, it's tough. And he's just sitting there at the gate. After the service, Al comes over and they have this amazing conversation through the gates. And first off, like Al is like still hilarious. He's like, I can't be mad at your mom. They had this connection. Hell, he's always been a handsome guy. He's been dead 2 days. He still looks better than me. And he's like, I'll be fine. I'm gonna move in with my brother. He's not in as good a shape as me, but I'm looking forward to all the pillow fights. I mean, he's just rattling off jokes like he's been doing the whole movie.
Even be shocked if Ron Howard was literally just telling him to come up with stuff, because it feels
100%.
like
it's so natural.
It just feels like there's no way this was lines somebody wrote in a script. Like it just doesn't feel that way. Not to say that they couldn't, but it's like, say this scene 8 different ways and we'll pick our best one.
And then there's this moment where Ed puts his hand on Al and he says, "You're my father." And it's the only time in the movie you see Al break from this like charm and charisma and constant jokes to like, it touches him so deeply, and he wells up and he looks down and they have this amazing moment between one another. And of course, Al's reminded the cameras are there. He kind of gathers himself, and the scene ends shortly after that. But it's like, that's when he got my Mark Strong award, because it's like, I love the jokes. It's great. And, I don't know. It's always good to have that comedic relief, but like to also have this layer of emotion with our main character, just to build up to make me laugh my ass off and then make me suddenly like tear up. Like it's incredible. I love that little turn, and it's a small, it's 10 seconds, that scene where they bond together there, but it was good. So like that hospital through this funeral, we're really just exploring what's been set up with all these different characters, moving parts, and I'm kind of impressed that it all works. So much so that we get a Jay Leno bit out of it. We get a little Jay Leno monologue. It's like, what's up with this family? The mom's too good at sex. The two boys are bad at sex. The dad dies while having sex. How do they reproduce? How's this family do it? It's like,
You seen this? Heard about this?
these are all fictional characters in a movie, but like, there's a believable like late night host joke about it, and the joke tracks and is pretty funny. Like, I'm just pretty impressed that the script was able to get to this point.
I want to point that out too. You talk about it. 'Cause first off, the scene you just mentioned of Martin Landau and him at the cemetery gate is absolutely amazing, because Martin Landau's character is not one of those ones that's kind of annoying. He's definitely like, he's the one that's just kind of trying to roll with this all the best he can, but he doesn't really break. And that's the one moment where he kind of has to stop and be like, all right, I have to acknowledge this. I can't just power through it. Because even in the scenes where the mom's like coming undone, like she like grabs his shoulders and he's like, ow. Like he's still
He's
just like
always
he
funny.
can't like he can't even stop there. But so I do love this scene a lot. I think it's really, really great. It was the other one in my head. Just, Ed and his dads. It's guaranteed emotion. Ed and his two dads. I don't know why they didn't call the movie that. It would have done gangbusters,
Ed and his
I'm
two
sure.
dads.
But you pointed out something that I want to highlight, because there is so much of this kind of like real world commentary that's peppered throughout this movie. You have RuPaul showing up repeatedly to give comments on Ed. You have Jay Leno showing up to give comments on Ed. You have his brother going on to Bill Mayer's show, where Bill Mayer buries the book for seeming kind of stupid when his brother writes a book about how mean Ed is. Ariana Huffington shows up in this movie, who's, the co-founder of the Huffington Post. And you've got like the show they keep cutting to. And at one point it's funny because Adam Goldberg's character shows up on it giving this very, very pompous, pretentious monologue about
take on it.
This intellectual take of how, it used to be that your skills made you famous, but now it's being famous that's made. It's like this kind of shift in the cultural zeitgeist, as he keeps calling it. But
and he put the pipe in his mouth at the end.
Puts a pipe in his mouth at the end of it, and he's doing. I'm just like, oh man. And then like he's playing pool with him like 2 scenes later. I was like,
did they have a falling out? No, they're just
no.
Still
Apparently,
buds.
he's just hanging out. But they cut to this show, and the show he's on, the panel is Michael Moore, like noted documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. Bowling for Columbine and things of that nature.
My opening line was one of his. This is the new low point in American culture.
Meryl Marco and George Plimpton also appear. George Plimpton's another. He did the Paris Review. He was actually kind of like a sports writer, and then Meryl Marco is just a occasional stand-up comedian, author as well. And then the moderator of that show, though, is Harry Shearer, who also plays the talk show host in Truman Show. Are we sort of establishing that these movies are in the same universe? We just keep doing this and we don't learn anything. It's so weird because like Harry Shearer is so funny. I mean, he's in Spinal Tap. He's so many voices on The Simpsons. But then like I don't know that he says anything here. Like he has like maybe 3 lines and like none of them are funny. And it's very wild that they throw that throughout this whole movie, but just throwing in this kind of like real world commentary, just kind of commenting on the state of American pop culture and everything. And it's another thing where like you're listening to them talk about it, and they're like, this is a new low point in like American culture. I was like, you have no idea what's coming. You sweet summer children, you would wish it was still like this. But it's wild. It adds like a weird sense to this, where it's like obviously like outside, again, looking at the Truman Show is kind of like almost a wild sitcom. Where again we're adding in this quote unquote real world commentary, trying to really drive that this is something that they're presenting, and it's trying to do that commentary on just like what does it mean if society enjoys watching the real life of somebody so much. Whereas Truman Show just kind of plows right past that. Although I guess it does have the subplot of like there are people who think Truman is basically being a slave, essentially, that he needs to be freed from this. But
both movies, one thing they do have in common is they keep cutting back to regular people getting caught up in the show. You see the same, maybe 10 different people. There's like There's some high school kids. There's a sorority house. There's a couple. There's a gay couple.
Oh, I noticed
There's...
the sorority house. The main girl originally is Jan Brady from the Brady Bunch movies in the 90s.
I didn't catch that.
I caught that. I was waiting for her to be like Marsha, but it never gets there. But turns out that's a different movie in a different universe. But
it turns out it's been really weird for her to say that for no reason.
In fact, it would have been very strange. I would have been like, "Why are you doing this?"
Another thing that happens in this movie that you text me about, again, we don't text often about these movies, but you were compelled. Ron Howard's brother, Clint Howard, is the man in the van broadcasting the show. And he just has these scenes where, kind of like we were saying about Martin Landau earlier, it's almost like Ron was like, hey, you got 15 seconds here, do something.
Just say something weird.
He's like on the phone and he literally goes, you want $10 to walk my dog? We had a deal, you little 8-year-old bastard. You know what? Keep the dog. And that's it. Like, why did we need to see that? This isn't a complaint. #Positivity Podcast. It was pretty funny. But in a movie that's so tight and so focused on this family and its commentary and stuff, I don't know why, like, Clint Howard gets to work in, like, a solid 2-minute routine throughout this movie. But there's another one where he talks to his doctor about his hair plugs. Says he had really
Of course I stopped
plugs.
payment on the plugs. You gave me doll's hair.
So
just
weird.
So weird. So weird. But yeah, I couldn't stop from pointing that out because again, it's the same vibe from those scenes where I'm like, I guarantee you there's probably like 2 hours of Clint Howard just saying weird crap in that van. Where Ron was like, I'm just gonna roll this camera and I'm just gonna like it just reminds me of the other guys, the Bed Bath and Beyond scene with Michael Keaton. I've probably said this before, but like Adam McKay has said there's probably like a 4-hour version of that scene where Michael Keaton, they just kept like they were like, talk about how you're not supposed to throw the trash cans away because you sell them. You're not supposed to throw them in the garbage. And he would just riff on that and go. And, things about like, talk about how it's Bed Bath and Beyond, but Beyond doesn't mean the afterlife. Like, just like weird crap like that. And because he's Michael Keaton and he's the greatest actor of all time, he just riff on it. And it's actually have you ever watched Michael Keaton stand up? Because it exists.
No.
It's out there. It's weird. It's so weird to watch because like even by the time he gets to like Mr. Mom, it's like something he's just like largely stopped doing. But like there's a whole period of time where Michael Keaton does stand up, and I'm just like, it's so weird. It's like I watch it and I'm like, I know this is Michael Keaton, but like for some reason I just don't believe that it is. Like I just don't know what the disconnect is. But
Michael Keaton, isn't it weird? We've probably talked about this before. That his like career died like in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then he had this resurgence. Like there's a period of time where he was like cast in bit parts. He had his few speaking parts like in Pixar movies, but like he's got the small part in other guys. He's in the RoboCop remake. He does Jack Frost, which is a flop. That EVP movie, White Noise. He was like not taken seriously anymore, and then he thankfully had this big return. He's back on top, but like, why did we ever doubt this man? He's so talented.
Yeah, from like 99 to like 2009, from like a solid decade there. To be fair, he's not doing a whole lot either, but like I think he kind of petered out in the late 90s, like the box office success waned, and that was a period of time where like Harold Ramis would talk about that too, where like, Harold Ramis directed Multiplicity, which was not a huge success, but he talked about how like Analyze This got him like, he's like, that bought me some juice in Hollywood because suddenly he had a hit.
Yeah.
So now if you wanted to do something,
lately attitude.
Yeah, like that was very much the attitude where like if a movie failed, like the director and all that was like, oh, well, your last movie didn't make any money. Why should we have you make another one? Like that was and it's still not uncommon now. But the things that it tends to be a little bit more of a nuanced picture now where like it was super acclaimed, got nominated for awards. They'll be like, okay, well, cool. We'll just, try to compensate and do things like that. But I think Michael Keaton got a little bit of that where like he had a couple things in a row that were kind of like, well, it's like you're not bankable anymore. And then, like you said, he does bit parts. And then it's 2010 he has Toy Story 3 and the other guys in the same year. And then that kind of slowly, you get RoboCop, you get Birdman, and then you get Spotlight, then you get The Founder, and then you get Spider-Man.
Yeah,
and like by that
he's
point,
back. He's back.
By that point, he's back. And now he's just back. He's Michael Keaton.
You know what he's not, though, Andrew? He's not in EdTV.
He's not in this movie.
I don't know why I'm talking about him.
Anyway, Clint Howard. Clint Howard's given weird leeway in this movie, and he still manages to be kind of funny with it.
I like that Matthew McConaughey talks about being from East Texas. The movie takes place in California. San Francisco, is that where we are?
Yeah, I think so.
Talks about being from East Texas, embraces, having his natural accent and everything. And of course, a lot of stories about being in the Texas area, driving to Houston, that story with his dad. He mentions being a Bearcat. Was he talking about Sam Houston? I wasn't entirely clear on if he...
I mean, he mentions going to like a junior college, but Sam Houston wasn't a junior college.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But
I think by that point, he was supposed to have already been in California. So I don't know if that's a California thing.
Well, maybe I'm stretching there. But he does wear a Oilers jacket through most of this movie, which...
Pretty sweet Oilers jacket.
I love the baby blue. He mentioned, hey, let's watch
Powder
some rock.
blue.
Excuse me. Yeah, he tells his brother, let's watch some Rocket Ball. He's talking about Houston Rockets. It's pretty cool. I liked all the Houston references. Andrew, I want to revisit this, though. We talked about Sherry's character, how she's uncomfortable with having no privacy. She's obviously starting this romance, but there's a little bit of controversy because she was dating his brother and not sure about the TVs. And like almost immediately, newspapers and people are watching are like, oh, she's a stuck up, this and that, dump her. She's crazy. You can do so much better. Like this viciously being attacked. Like there's a scene of the guys watching from like the kitchen of a restaurant where they're just like, she's psycho, she's damaged goods, get away from... And it's like, I'm watching it, I'm like, man, this is horrible stuff they're saying about her. I feel like maybe in 99 those scenes played a little bit more comedic, maybe, I don't know. But regardless, it's clearly saying something. It's kind of what I was getting to earlier. Like the movie doesn't really shy away from it. Like the way she is treated in this show, in large part for being a woman, is disgusting, scarily accurate for like a post-internet world. These are those things that I was kind of... You go back, we talk about the pre-9/11 movie all the time, watching a pre-9/11 movie. These aren't the kind of things that I expect to be dealt with. I was kind of surprised that it was two dudes that wrote this movie, because between the way she's treated and between Ellen DeGeneres' storyline of being overlooked at work and getting, finally getting to come up against her boss, I thought there might, maybe there was uncredited rewrite or whatever, but it felt like there was a female voice at some point in this movie, but there's really not that I can see creatively. But I think it's, again, I just appreciate that they wove those in there and it felt real and accurate.
I agree. And it's possible. I mean, like, I don't want to say that she had any impact, but somebody like Ellen DeGeneres in your cast, I mean, she's obviously a comedian. She's obviously written things. She's obviously probably got some insight into that and could potentially have, that's kind of what's interesting about it. Even Rob Reiner being a director and a writer, like you've got these people that are on set that are kind of known for writing and directing. It's very possible that they have some input over the dialogue in these scenes and kind of trying to make it feel a little bit more authentic. Trying to keep it as far away from like the kind of the hallmarks of the men writing women subreddit, which folks, if you really don't think this issue is that bad, please go check that subreddit. It's there are some pretty egregious examples out there of how men write women and I guess how they think women sound. But it is anyway, I do agree though. I think largely the movie feels pretty good in that regard. As it's something that could have been very easy for the female characters in this movie to kind of be portrayed this in a much more stereotypical way. Obviously, like you said, they're really mean to Sherry, and
almost immediately talking about how she is not hot enough, and that really stood out to you. Like,
but like again, you're kind of looking at the notion of like social media, things like that, where or not even just social media, but just the internet in general, where you present that idea that because they're never going to know who you are, it doesn't matter. Like you can say awful things because, well, they're never going to know who I am. I'm never going to have to face consequences. People will say, oh, well, they'd never say that in real life. And it's like, okay, but like they said it online. Like, so clearly there's some line where they don't feel bad about crossing it. And this movie, like I said, there's a little bit of a almost too real sense of this movie at times, where like you're watching it at times and I'm like, oh, all right, I wasn't ready for you to go there.
Put the mirror down.
Yeah, put it down. Stop looking at me. Stop putting that camera on me. I didn't ask for this. So it's Andrew,
all right, look, real quick, the end of this movie, the way he gets the show canceled is he says he's going to pay $10,000 to whoever can give him the juiciest information, skeleton in the closet, embarrassing information about an executive at the network. And he's going to reveal it on national TV at 9:00 on the show. And that's his way to force them to cancel it, because someone's going to want to cancel the show before he says the thing that he found out, right? Well, Ellen DeGeneres' character feeds him some information about Rob Reiner's character. And admittedly, this is kind of a problem I have with the movie, because the super embarrassing thing that he has on him is that he has a penile implant, which is some tubes in his penis, and he's got to artificially pump something to get an erection. My problem with it is that this is a legitimate medical procedure for men that have a need for this. And the fact that it's presented as something embarrassing, I don't know, imagining someone that might have that watching this and get ridiculed for this thing. It doesn't sit too well with me. It's not like cancel the movie kind of thing, but I'm at the part where I'm like, all right, we probably could have come up with something else. But, Andrew, I had another thought with this thing. That's and of course, Rob Reiner's character cancels the show abruptly before it can be said who he's talking about. It's very clearly him. Andrew, thanks to the Harvey Weinstein trials, we all learned a lot about Harvey Weinstein's genitalia.
Yes, we did.
Andrew, is Rob Reiner, the character of Mr. Whitaker, supposed to be Harvey Weinstein?
I will respond to this question as I respond to a great many other questions. It's not Harvey Weinstein.
You remember after Bill Cosby went down, this clip circulated from 30 Rock.
Did he?
As
far as I know, he's still not in prison. So
is he not in prison?
He got out.
Okay. Well, you know what I'm referring to when I say he. Okay.
Yes.
This clip circulated from 30 Rock where, Bill Clinton was supposed to be on the phone, and Tina Fey leans in and goes, "I haven't forgiven you for what you did to my Aunt Shirley," or something like that. And that joke is way before the story broke, but it became clear that it was an open secret amongst comedians and actors. People knew what was happening well before the public did. And that had to be true of Weinstein. And this is this specific thing about genitalia, and he's an awful executive who is overbearing on projects, and he's Rob Reiner. You're playing a large man with this beard, this gray beard, which granted, that's just kind of Rob Reiner's look anyway.
Yeah, Rob Reiner still looks like Rob Reiner, yeah.
But he was cast as this character is what I'm saying. Mr. Whitaker. I don't know exactly what the phrase dollars to donuts means, but I'm going to use it here. Dollars to donuts, they were doing this intentionally because of information they had about Harvey Weinstein. That's my guess.
Like I said, it's not Harvey Weinstein. Also, it's dollars to donuts because it was meant to be that you were so certain you would exchange your money for something not worth anything.
Wait, what? How does that?
Dollars, because you're so certain that the dollars are being bet against something essentially worthless. Because you're so certain of what you're doing.
Explain to me like I'm 5. What? In what scenario?
So when you make a bet on something, you're so certain it's going to happen that you're betting against something that's worthless because you're so certain.
You're betting against something that's worthless?
So I am betting $10 to your 10 donuts that something is going to happen because I am so certain that it's happening, I'm not going to lose my money.
Oh, I'll put my hard-earned cash against your donuts because I'm going to win.
Because I know what's going to happen. And so I keep my money and get your donuts because who doesn't want that deal?
Okay. Huh.
It used to be dollars to buttons or dollars to dumplings for the same idea of dollars to buttons because I'm going to win this. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Hey, learn something new every day. Thanks, Andrew. I really like this movie. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a blast. And I think most importantly, it's so like it no longer lives in the same spot in my brain as the Truman Show. Because I hadn't really
I would
watched
agree.
this movie or rewatched this movie, I just thought of it as the Pepsi, the Truman Show is Coke. Which, by the way, oh my God, how did we not mention this?
I was about to bring it up. I was not going to let us get out of here without talking about it.
You go. You bring it up, Andrew.
So anyway, at one point, Ed is backstage at the Tonight Show. They mentioned they have a limo. They're going to get him to take him to the airport, and he says he wants a soda or something. And he goes, Pepsi or Coke? And there's this like moment where he stops, and he goes, Pepsi. And then they continue on. But then like in the next scene, his apartment is like covered in Pepsi stuff. There's a Pepsi machine. There's a Pepsi truck. Like they've got a big Pepsi sponsorship. And I want to make it very clear to everyone, we did not know this going in calling this
Absolutely
Pepsi Month.
not.
We had no idea. So we, what an amazing bit of synergy. Would this be irony or would this still just be a coincidence?
I think it's just a coincidence. But
Just a
it's fun
coincidence.
one.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It is very fun. But so throughout the second half of this movie. Also, I will say this, hashtag PP. This movie is very long. It's like 2 hours long. And
Sure.
there's like several different, it feels like a couple different movies at certain points.
But we needed those Clint Howard jokes, Andrew.
We needed him. Clint Howard is actually 40 minutes of the runtime, folks. He's actually like, they just wouldn't cut away from him. But
There's like supposed to be a spin-off of like Man in the Van. It's just Clint Howard just talking to himself.
It's just Clint Howard being the technical director on like a variety of different television shows. Back to infomercials where he says he's going after this ends. But it was a very funny bit to see just like Pepsi in bright letters everywhere. I was like, is this CM Punk's favorite movie? It probably is.
It's pretty good though. I enjoy this movie, and like I said, it's definitely distinct from Truman Show now that I've really digested it, and I've talked a lot about how I'm impressed on how well it aged and how accurately it predicted a few things, and possibly even is a metaphorical takedown of Harvey Weinstein before that all went down. So this is
there is a I gotta be honest, I didn't even think of that watching this, but in hindsight, it is something where, it's. I didn't really weigh in on this because I wanted to tell you what dollars to donuts meant, but it is interesting about these things where you hear that they were just kind of like these open secrets, like Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, or even stuff in professional wrestling, like obviously Vince McMahon just had his big comeuppance. And it's based off of, people are like, oh, they finally got some stuff to stick to. And I'm like, yeah, but it's after like decades of hearing about stories and things and various people and women that disappeared from the industry completely after seemingly being en route to kind of prominent positions of stardom. And I always have very mixed feelings with that because it feels like, okay, we've got this awful thing happening, so we're not really going to try to do anything about it. We're just going to make jokes about it in the movie. And there's obviously a conversation there of like, what are they capable of doing? And in a lot of cases, the answer is not much. There is obviously, people like this are very powerful. They hold these positions of authority for a reason, and they will do almost anything to hang on to them. So I always have a little bit of two minds about things like that, where, we're making jokes about it because, if anybody in life deserves to be made fun of, it's Harvey Weinstein. But at the same time, we could have tried protecting people a little bit more. Anyway, great movie.
Yeah, I agree, but we can't end there. Yeah, great movie. Great movie.
Anyway, let me actually talk about
let
me actually give my final thoughts on this movie though. But I do agree with you completely that this occupies a very different space in my head than Truman Show does. Where Truman Show is a movie where you're kind of like I said, it's almost like a weird Stepford Wives-esque sitcom where like, you've got this Truman with this world, this increasingly fabricated world slowly crumbling down around him, and you're just like wondering the whole time, you're like, how far are they going to go to keep the illusion? Whereas with this, there's never any illusion. So like with Truman Show, you've got this like dystopic science fiction story. Whereas with this, you have still a dystopic aspect, but that's mostly just based off of the real world dystopia that we're currently living in. But just much more of a ground level approach to that of just like, what would this thing kind of look like? Not to say that this movie's grounded in any real sense, but it's a very different approach. It's a very different execution. And yeah, I like it. I think it's good. I think you've got a really good cast of this movie that are bringing strong performances to these characters. And I think it's really, really good. I had a lot of fun watching it, and I will probably watch it again on purpose.
All right, Andrew, 2 weeks into Pepsi month and going strong. I'm really enjoying this one. Next week, we are going to mix it up a little bit. The movie we're watching next week is Small Soldiers, the movie from the 90s about sentient toys. That's not Toy Story. It's a little bit different because it didn't come out at like the same time as Toy Story, and with it being live action, I don't think anyone is confusing the two the way they might do EdTV and Truman Show or Deep Impact or Armageddon and go, which is the one that had this actor, and kind of take a minute. I think those are definitely distinct movies, but it was taken notice at the time that there was similarities in themes. And that seemed to happen with a lot of early Pixar movies. The first, there's the whole Bug's Life and Ants that happened. It seemed like there was kind of a string of movies. Finding Nemo and Shark's Tale, is that what it was called?
Yeah, the Will Smith one.
Shark Tale? Yeah, God.
Yeah, Shark's Tale.
That in a long time. Yeah.
Why'd you do that?
We're doing Small Soldiers, and I cannot wait to talk about this movie. Spoilers for next week. I love this movie. I've watched it a ton. I haven't watched it in a very long time, so I will be revisiting it. Maybe I'll get my kids to watch it with me. But yeah, I'm excited to jump into that next week.
I remember this one coming out, so I too am excited to go back to that one and revisit it and relive my youth.
That's next week. For now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to ask us a question for a future episode, you can do exactly that. Just hop into our Discord. There's a link right there in the show notes. Come and join us. Why don't you? It's a channel called Question of the Week. You can drop your cues just like that guy in Doom did. And here's this question, Andrew. Stacked casts seem to happen all the time to help a movie sell. What movie have you gone back to after years and not realized how stacked it has become in time? Great question, that guy in Doom. I feel like this is something that we've said a few times on this show as we revisit some of these older movies and been like, wow, I didn't think of it, when it released, but you look at these actors, what they've gone on to do, this is kind of a stacked cast.
Yeah, great question. Definitely not my brother. So obviously, even at TV, like kind of looking at this, like I had no idea this cast would like have so many people I knew in it. Like,
yeah.
I think, I won't necessarily say that's my answer, but it's definitely something I noticed watching this being like, wow. Like,
yeah, Woody Harrelson, Dennis Hopper, like I did not know they were going to show up in this movie.
And, so probably the one that I kind of think about the most, and obviously I'm a huge fan of this now. But it's because it's easy to go back to an old movie you kind of didn't know about and watch it and see it on a stat cast. I kind of feel like that's kind of cheating. Like, I could be like, oh, well, I'd never seen The Great Escape or The Dirty Dozen. And then I realized it's a stacked cast. It's like, well, of course it was. That was the point. Like when they made the movie, it was definitely supposed to have a stacked cast. The one that always comes to mind for me is Clue, though. And like, obviously I love Clue. I don't think we could ever get away with talking about it on the show. And we've talked about it before. Absolutely. But you didn't see it until fairly recently, right? Or
I think
more
it was
recently?
one of my like lockdown like pandemic era watches. Yeah. So it's pretty past few years.
Yeah. It's past few years. But like, I remember watching this as a kid and like watching it and enjoying it and just having like no idea who all of these people were outside maybe Christopher Lloyd. I think he was probably the only person because I'd seen like Back to the Future or something. I know I'd seen something as a kid that he was. It might have even been Dennis the Menace, the live action Dennis the Menace movie they made where he played like a weird drifter. But then like you go back and you like start seeing that like, you know, you start seeing all the things that Eileen Brennan was in. You start seeing all the things that Tim Curry was in. You start seeing all the things that like Madeline Kahn was in back in the 70s with Mel Brooks and everybody. You look at Michael McKean with his career, obviously things like Spinal Tap and stuff like that. Even Martin Mull, who's obviously probably the closest of that cast to somebody that's kind of much more known as a character actor. But even the stuff that he was in, and even kind of the later stuff, is like, I knew Martin Mull from Jingle All the Way. Like, that was a later movie that I knew, and I was like, hey, that's the guy from Clue. And even Leslie Ann Warren, who she was on a soap opera. That was the big thing she did for a long time, and I can't remember which one it was. But or was it a soap opera? Am I getting my wires crossed? Probably. I don't remember.
No one knows. It's okay.
And there's no way to look this up. There's definitely like no way to check. But even with her, there was still stuff like Victor Victoria that she was in. And just this amazing cast. And even some of the smaller roles, like Lee Ving is in that movie, and he's like the lead singer for the band Fear, which is a band I'd heard of, but like then I was like watching like a video on him or something, and they're like, lead singer Lee Ving. I was like, wait, Mr. Body? Like, what? So like just weird things like that too, where just these people would appear, and I'd be like, and like Jane Weedland of the Go-Go's is the singing telegram girl in Clue 2. So like just this, even the small parts are like stuffed with these little characters that you like aren't necessarily going to recognize immediately, especially as a kid. But then when you look back, you're just like, man, if you put that cast would have been really expensive, like even 5-10 years after that movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great pick. You mentioned in the beginning of that, you said, you know, one that's always on my mind. Clearly, you just mean the movie itself. Like Clue is just always on your mind as a movie you think about all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just
but,
are other people not like that? Am I alone in that experience of always thinking about Clue?
no, I do like that. My favorite version of this is definitely going back and like everyone went on to have a, you know, more significant career and get famous, and that's, you know, in retrospect the movie becomes stacked. So, you know, I'm trying to think of, you know, I can think of like what, you know, like you go back and watch Moneyball and like Chris Pratt is in it, and you don't think of that as, you know, no one knew who the hell he was at the time. But as far as like a whole cast, you know, I think a lot of people have probably forgotten that X-Men, the first X-Men, was all nobodies. Not nobody, that sounds a little too derogatory, but unknowns for sure. Like Patrick Stewart is the known commodity there, and you know, he's the Star Trek guy. Everyone knew who Patrick Stewart was, but like Ian McKellen was not a big actor in America in movies. He had some parts throughout the 90s. We talked about The Shadow. We showed up there, and or Last Action Hero, but no one knew who Ian McKellen was. He was a theater guy. Hugh Jackman. No one knew who the hell Hugh Jackman was. Halle Berry was just a model turned actor who showed up in a few bit parts. This is before Monsters Ball. James Marsden has had a long, successful career after that. Anna Paquin was just a child actor mostly before that movie. You know, she goes on to do True Blood and have a lot of stuff too. So that movie has
It's
definitely...
odd to think that Famke Janssen is arguably a bigger star in that movie than most everybody else at the time.
Yeah.
Because she was in
I think that's fair.
GoldenEye, she was in House on Haunted Hill, she was in The Faculty. She had at least been in stuff that people had seen. So, like, it's so odd to think that, like, when X-Men comes out, Famke Janssen is the bigger star than Hugh Jackman. Not to say that Famke Janssen isn't a tremendous actor, but, like, you know, Hugh Jackman blew up into superstardom after X-Men, whereas after Patrick Stewart, she might be the most known quantity to American audiences at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it's so backwards from superhero movies now, where you expect a stat cast, well-known names, bring everybody together. This is like, you know, we've got a limited budget, we've got to scrape some people together, get this cast down, and their star power has only grown in time since then.
It's an odd formula, because the Christopher Reeve Superman sets that idea that like your hero is unknown, but everybody around him is probably going to be pretty well known. So like, you know, Christopher Reeve, nobody knows who he is, but Margot Kidder, Gene Hackman, Marlon Brando, you know, Jackie Cooper, like everybody knows who they are. They were known quantities at the time, and that continues even with like Michael Keaton's Batman, where Michael Keaton's not necessarily unknown in 1989, much to the opposite. People hated that he was cast, but Then you put
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and you're like, okay, there you go. Now there's your known quantity. With an ensemble film, it's so much more difficult because you can't really do that. You can have a couple of unknowns, but at a certain point, your core group needs to have some people that you've heard of, and so it's a much tougher balance. And so X-Men is an interesting thing to look at, especially afterwards, because you're like, yeah, these people just all went on to be pretty successful. Ian McKellen does that Lord of the Rings thing. That turned out pretty well for him.
It's pretty big movies. In the Discord, Caboose actually responded to this question, and they said Reign of Fire, which we mentioned earlier in this podcast, because Matthew McConaughey is in that movie. The two leads of Reign of Fire, that dragon movie that really flew under the radar. I remember seeing it. I don't know if it's good or not. I haven't gone back to it, but I feel like it came out, well before the Game of Thrones craze, so maybe it's ahead of its time. I don't know. But Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey are the two leads of that movie, which I do remember, but obviously they were not the names they are now at the time. But I looked up the cast. Gerard Butler is also in that movie. So you've got three, soon-to-be huge action stars. Well, I guess Matthew McConaughey isn't action star, but, his star power certainly rose after this movie. All in this dragon movie that kind of came and went.
I remember when Reign of Fire came out too. Like I remember seeing trailers for it, and like there was that big moment where like in the trailer where somebody's like flying through the air at a dragon, and I was like, man, I should watch that. I never did.
The movie is set in England in the year 2020.
I've got to be honest with you, Chris. When I consider the idea of the 2020 we got versus the
Which one's
2020 of
worse?
potential dragons, I have to stop and think about which one I'd prefer.
Oh boy, 2020 certainly was a Reign of Fire. That's a lot of fun. What's your pick? Stacked Cast, a movie that you didn't realize was a stacked cast. You went back to it later. I want to hear your answers, so let us know in that Discord or hit us up on social media. And don't forget the Great Game Debate podcast. I've got a link right there in the show notes. We went on there to debate each other, Andrew and I, for what is the greatest year in film. Listen to that episode and weigh in. Let us know what you think. Who won that debate? Head over to their Discord server and you can even vote and influence the winner. We would certainly appreciate it. I know they would too. Until next week, until Small Soldiers, just remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony, and thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. Check. 1 2 1 2. Check.
Checking the levels. Welcome to Talk Radio, folks. I'm gonna bring the smooth voice today as you begin your drives into the city. It's a shitty commute, and we're here to make it worse.
Welcome to Best of the Rest in the Morning. I'm Chris Logan with Andrew.
Oh God, I hate it already. I hate it already because I know exactly. We've all heard that show. There's your post credits for this one.